I stood in the doorway of what my son Michael euphemistically called the guest room, my weathered hands gripping the handle of my sensible suitcase. The space before me could hardly be called a room at all, more like a glorified closet with a window. A thin futon on a metal frame was pressed against one wall, sagging noticeably in the middle. A wobbly side table held a lamp with a crooked shade. The paint was peeling in one corner where water damage had clearly occurred, and the single window faced the neighbor's brick wall, just 2 feet away. "It's cozy, isn't it?" Michael said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sorry it's not the master suite, but Caroline's parents arrived yesterday, and we gave them that. Stephanie and James got the other guest rooms with their families." "Of course," I nodded, keeping my expression neutral despite the sinking feeling in my chest. "Family comes first." Michael's laugh was just a touch too hearty. "And your family too, Mom. Just. You're used to making do." Making do. As if I'd spent my life cutting corners rather than stretching dollars to raise 3 children on my own after their father walked out 30 years ago. As if I hadn't worked 2 jobs to put them through college, postponing my own dreams until they were established. "I'll be fine here," I said quietly. "I'm only staying for 3 nights." "Great. I'll let you get settled. Dinner's at 6. Michael retreated quickly, clearly relieved to escape the awkwardness of the situation. Alone, I set my suitcase on the futon and sank down beside it, feeling the metal frame dig into my thighs through the thin mattress. This was what I had become to my children, an afterthought. The relative to be accommodated in the least desirable space, while my daughter-in-law's parents enjoyed the master suite with its king-sized bed and ensuite bathroom. I glanced at my modest wristwatch, a stark contrast to the fortune now sitting in my bank account. Just 3 weeks ago, I'd hit the Powerball for $37 million. After taxes and choosing the lump sum option, I'd walked away with just over $16 million. Not one of my children knew. I had planned to tell them on Christmas Day, to share my good fortune with the family I'd sacrificed so much for. I'd imagine their surprise, their joy, perhaps even their apologies for the years of dwindling attention as their own lives grew more comfortable while they assumed mine remained modest. Now, sitting on this squeaking futon in a room that smelled faintly of mothballs and old paint, I wondered if they deserved to know it all. From downstairs came the sound of laughter, my grandchildren's high-pitched giggles, adult conversation, the clink of glasses. No one had come to invite me down. No one had offered to help me unpack or made sure I had fresh towels. I was simply expected to appear when needed and stay out of the way otherwise. I stood and moved to the small window, gazing at the brick wall beyond. Last Christmas had been similar, relegated to the background, given the least comfortable chair at dinner, my gifts to the grandchildren overshadowed by more expensive presents from their parents. I told myself it didn't matter, that being together was enough. But something had shifted in me when that lottery ticket changed my life. Money hadn't just given me financial security, it had reminded me of my own worth. After decades of putting everyone else first, I'd started to imagine a life where I mattered, where my comfort was considered, where I was more than just grandma, existing on the periphery. I unzipped my suitcase and removed a folder containing bank statements and legal documents, evidence of my recent windfall and the careful plans I'd been making. Initially, those plans had been generous. Paying off my children's mortgages outright, setting up college funds for the grandchildren, perhaps buying a vacation property they could all enjoy. Now, I wondered if my generosity had been premature. Perhaps what my family needed wasn't another handout, but a lesson, one that had been a long time coming. I felt a surprising calm settle over me as I tucked the folder back into my suitcase. I wouldn't be sharing my news tomorrow after all. Instead, I would watch and wait. I would see if any of my children, Michael, Stephanie, or James, showed me the respect and consideration I deserved. And if they didn't, well, I now had the resources to teach them exactly how it felt to be treated as an afterthought. From my purse, I removed a brochure for World Elite Cruises, a luxury line offering a 3-week Mediterranean voyage I'd been eyeing. The family reconciliation package promised connecting suites, private excursions, and healing experiences for multi-generational groups. The price tag was steep, $15,000 per person, not including airfare. But money was no longer an object for me, Eleanor Wilson. I slipped the brochure back into my purse and straightened my shoulders. 3 days in the spare room. 3 days of observation and evidence gathering. 3 days of playing the role they expected. The accommodating mother, the helpful grandmother, the woman who would accept any treatment because family was all she had. And then the real planning would begin. I took a deep breath and headed downstairs to join the family that had no idea their lives were about to change completely. The Wilson family Christmas Eve dinner was in full swing when I finally made my way to the dining room. Michael sat at the head of the table, carving the ham with the confident flourish of a man in his own castle. At 41, he had his father's height and my own dark eyes, though his were harder somehow, lacking the compassion I'd tried to instill. "Mom, there you are," Michael called, gesturing to the empty chair wedged in the corner between my youngest grandchildren. "We were just about to start without you." I doubted that was true. The appetizers were long gone, wine glasses already half empty. They'd been enjoying themselves for at least half an hour. "Sorry to keep everyone waiting," I said, though I'd come down precisely at 6 as instructed. "No worries, Eleanor," Caroline, Michael's wife, said with practiced politeness. Her gaze didn't quite meet mine. "We're just glad you could join us this year." As if I had options. As if I hadn't spent every Christmas with my children since their father left, even during the lean years when dinner was more modest and gifts were few, but thoughtfully chosen. Stephanie, my middle child, looked up briefly from her phone. At 38, she had transformed from a warm, creative girl into a woman perpetually distracted by her corporate climb. "Hey, Mom. Nice sweater." I glanced down at my forest green cardigan, hand-knit, and one of my favorites. The comment wasn't a compliment. I could tell by Stephanie's quick glance at her husband, Greg. The fashionable couple preferred designer labels and likely found my handmade clothing quaint at best. Only James, my youngest at 35, made a genuine effort. He rose to pull out my chair, kissed my cheek. "You look great, Mom. Did you cut your hair?" His wife, Natalie, nodded in agreement, though she immediately turned back to her conversation with Caroline's mother.
"Thank you, James."
"I did," I confirmed, touched that someone had noticed. For a moment, I questioned whether my simmering plan was fair to him. But then I remembered how quickly he'd agreed when Michael suggested I take the spare room, despite having a perfectly good pull-out couch in his own guest room. I picked up my water glass, no wine had been poured for me, and observed the tableau before me. 3 children I'd raised alone after Thomas Wilson had declared family life too restrictive and departed for a new life in Arizona with his 24-year-old secretary. 3 children whose college tuitions I'd managed through extra shifts at the hospital where I'd worked as a nurse for 30 years. 3 children who now lived in homes more expensive than I could have dreamed of, who took vacations I'd only seen in magazines, who seemed increasingly embarrassed by their middle-class mother with her sensible shoes and handmade gifts. "So, Eleanor," Caroline's father boomed from his place of honor opposite Michael, "still living in that little ranch house on Maple?" "Yes," I answered simply. No need to mention I'd paid off the mortgage 5 years ago, or that I loved my modest home with its garden in back and the lemon tree I'd nurtured from a sapling. "You really should consider one of those senior communities," Caroline's mother suggested, not unkindly, but with clear condescension. "My sister moved into Silver Pines last year. Activities every day, people to look after you, no more worries about home repairs." "I'm only 62, I pointed out. "And I enjoy my independence." Michael chuckled. Mom's stubborn about that house. We've suggested she downsize plenty of times, haven't we, guys? Stephanie and James nodded. A united front. It would be easier for you, Stephanie added. Lower expenses, less maintenance. I bit back a retort. They'd been pushing for me to sell the family home for years. The home they'd grown up in, the home that held thousands of memories. They claimed concern for my financial security, but I suspected they simply found my address embarrassing. The wrong zip code. Too modest for the parents of such successful adults. I'm quite comfortable where I am, I said firmly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. How's the retirement fund holding up? Greg asked, clearly trying to change the subject but landing on an equally presumptuous one. Markets have been volatile this year. All eyes turned to me, evaluating. They assumed I was barely getting by on my pension and modest savings. That was the narrative they'd created. Their mother, the financial charity case, the one who needed their occasional largesse and frequent advice. For just a moment, I contemplated telling them right then. Watching their expressions transform as I revealed that I'd matched all 6 numbers on the Powerball. That the frivolous $2 weekly ticket they'd teased me about for years had yielded more money than any of them would see in their lifetimes. Instead, I smiled. I managed just fine, thank you. Well, if you ever need help, Michael began, the offer hollow in a way that made my spine stiffen. I know where to find you. I finished, though we both knew I would never ask. I hadn't asked when my roof needed replacing last year, or when my car's transmission failed. I'd simply solved my own problems, as I always had. The conversation moved on, to Stephanie's recent promotion, to James and Natalie's plans for a kitchen renovation, to Michael and Caroline's upcoming ski trip to Aspen. No one asked about my life, my friends, my activities. My existence outside this annual obligation didn't seem to register. As dessert was served, a store-bought cheesecake rather than the homemade apple pie I'd traditionally baked, I watched my family with new eyes. These were not the children I'd raised to be kind, considerate, grateful. Somewhere along the way, they transformed into strangers who saw me as an obligation rather than a joy. The realization should have broken my heart. Instead, it hardened my resolve. Later, as the evening wound down, I overheard Michael and Caroline in the kitchen. Did you put fresh towels in Mom's room? Michael asked, loading dishes into the dishwasher. I forgot, Caroline admitted. But it's just your mom. She won't complain. True, Michael agreed with a laugh. She's pretty low maintenance. I slipped away before they could notice me, climbing the stairs to my cramped spare room with its thin futon and inadequate blanket. Low maintenance. As if my dignity was an optional feature, my comfort an unnecessary luxury. I took out my phone and pulled up the calculator app, running numbers with practiced efficiency. 3 mortgages. Approximately $1. $2 million in total debt, given the upscale neighborhoods my children had chosen. A significant sum, but barely a dent in my newfound fortune. Then I opened my email and confirmed my appointment with Harvey Geller, the real estate attorney I'd consulted after my win. His firm specialized in anonymous property acquisitions through LLCs and shell companies. He'd been intrigued by my initial inquiry. I'd like to purchase my children's mortgages without their knowledge. Is this possible? His response had been cautiously affirmative. With the right connections and sufficient funds, almost anything was possible in real estate. I set an alert for 7 a.m., early enough to be dressed and composed before the chaos of Christmas morning began downstairs. Then I turned off the lamp, plunging the tiny room into darkness broken only by the glow of the neighbor's security light through the thin curtains. Tomorrow I would play my part one last time. The grateful mother, the doting grandmother, the woman they could tuck away in a spare room and occasionally remember to acknowledge. Soon they would know exactly who I really was. Christmas morning exploded with the chaotic energy of 5 grandchildren tearing into presents, their excited shrieks echoing off the vaulted ceilings of Michael and Caroline's open-concept living room. I watched from my position on an uncomfortable folding chair hastily added to the seating arrangement, a cup of lukewarm coffee balanced on my knee. Grammy, look. 6-year-old Emma thrust a tablet computer into my hands. Santa knew exactly what I wanted. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I said, examining the expensive device. No doubt Santa's generous gift would be contrasted with the hand-knit sweater and illustrated book I had brought. I'd made the sweater myself, choosing the softest merino yarn in Emma's favorite purple, working on it for months between hospital volunteer shifts. Sure enough, when Emma opened my gift 20 minutes later, her smile dimmed noticeably. "Thanks, Grammy," she said dutifully before rushing back to her tablet. The scene repeated with each grandchild. Polite but muted thanks for my thoughtful but modest offerings, followed by immediate return to the electronic devices and branded toys from their parents and Caroline's parents, the Montgomerys, who had spared no expense. My own gifts for my children were telling. A generic bath set from Stephanie and Greg, the kind bought in a last-minute dash through the department store. A gift card to a chain restaurant from James and Natalie, with a value that suggested it had been a free promotional item with purchase, and from Michael and Caroline, a subscription to a meal delivery service. "So you don't have to cook for one anymore," Caroline explained, her tone suggesting she'd done me an enormous favor. "The portions are perfectly sized for singles." How thoughtful. I managed, though the implications stung. My cooking had once been legendary in the family, holiday feasts that took days to prepare, Sunday dinners that brought everyone together. Now I was being told that even that contribution was unnecessary. The Montgomerys, meanwhile, had received premium golf club memberships from Michael and Caroline, a sharp contrast to my meal subscription. As the morning progressed, I found myself increasingly sidelined. I offered to help in the kitchen but was shooed away by Caroline and her mother, who clearly viewed me as more hindrance than help. I tried to join a conversation about summer vacation plans, but fell silent when I realized they were discussing a family trip to Europe that no one had thought to mention to me. Around noon, I excused myself to use the bathroom and took the opportunity to call Harvey Geller. The attorney answered despite the holiday. "Mrs. Wilson, Merry Christmas. I have some preliminary information for you." I closed the bathroom door and lowered my voice. "Go ahead. I've confirmed that all 3 mortgages are held by Meridian Bank. That simplifies things considerably. We can approach them with a bulk purchase offer after the holidays." "Perfect," I said. "And they won't notify the mortgage holders?" "Not as long as the terms remain unchanged. Your children will continue making payments exactly as before, just to a different entity, one that you'll control." "Excellent. Please proceed as we discussed, and increase your fee by 20% for working on Christmas." Harvey chuckled. "That's generous of you, Mrs. Wilson. May I ask, is this a protective measure for your family, or—" "Let's call it an educational opportunity," I replied. "My children need to learn the value of respect. Sometimes that lesson comes with a price tag." After ending the call, I took a moment to compose myself in the mirror. The woman who stared back wasn't the fading grandmother my children perceived. I saw clear eyes, determined jaw, the quiet dignity of a woman who had weathered life's storms without complaint. A woman who deserved better than a spare room and perfunctory gifts. Downstairs, I found the family gathered in the living room, coats on, clearly preparing to go out. "Oh, Mom, there you are," Michael said, adjusting his scarf. "We're heading to Rosewood for dinner. The Montgomerys treated us to reservations months ago." "I see," I said, glancing around at the dressed-up family. "Should I get my coat?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Caroline and Stephanie exchanged glances. James suddenly became very interested in his shoes. "Well, the thing is," Michael began awkwardly, "they only reserved for 8 adults." and someone needs to stay with the kids. We take them, Caroline's father interjected, but the restaurant is adults only. Very exclusive. I understood immediately. I wasn't invited to this fancy dinner. Instead, I was expected to babysit 5 children while everyone else enjoyed a gourmet meal. We got you that nice meal subscription, Caroline added brightly. Maybe you could make one of those for yourself, and the kids could have pizza? We won't be too late. The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that of course I would agree, of course I had no other plans or preferences, of course my Christmas dinner would be a pre-packaged single serving while watching my grandchildren, struck me like a physical blow. For one dangerous moment, I contemplated telling them everything. Watching their faces as I revealed my $16 million secret. Seeing them scramble to include me, to apologize, to justify their behavior. But that would be too easy. They wouldn't learn anything except that money commanded their respect, a lesson they had already absorbed too well. Certainly, I said instead, my voice pleasant. The children and I will be fine. Relief washed over their faces. Not one of them questioned whether this arrangement was fair or considerate. Not one of them offered to stay behind, so I could go instead. Not even James, who had always been my most thoughtful child. You're a lifesaver, Mom, Stephanie said, already heading for the door. Don't wait up, Michael added. We might go for drinks after. As they filed out, I heard Caroline's mother's stage whisper, She really is convenient to have around for childcare, isn't she? The door closed behind them, leaving me alone with 5 children high on Christmas excitement and sugar. I stood motionless in the center of the living room, surrounded by discarded wrapping paper and forgotten toys, the weight of my invisibility pressing down like a physical force. Then slowly I smiled. The empty house meant privacy. Pulling out my phone, I made another call, this time to World Elite Cruises. Yes, I'd like to book the family reconciliation package for 16 people, I said when the agent answered. The Mediterranean voyage departing March 15th. My grandchildren's shouts faded into background noise as I focused on the call, providing my credit card information and confirming details. And how would you like the invitation sent, Mrs. Wilson? The agent asked. I watched my oldest grandson crash a remote control car into the base of the Christmas tree, knocking off several ornaments. No one had taught him to be careful with other people's belongings. Make them impressive, I instructed. The kind no one would refuse. After ending the call, I ordered pizza for the children and a salad for myself. As we ate, I studied each child, noting how even the youngest had already absorbed their parents' dismissive attitude toward me. My handmade gifts lay abandoned beneath the tree while they clutched their expensive electronics. These were not the values I had raised my children with. Somewhere along the way, gratitude and compassion had been replaced by entitlement and indifference. My grandchildren were following the same path. Perhaps my plan wasn't just about teaching my children a lesson. Perhaps it was about reclaiming the family I had once been so proud of, or accepting that it no longer existed. The front door opened near midnight, admitting the adults in high spirits, smelling of expensive wine, and talking too loudly. I had long since put the children to bed and was sitting alone in the darkened living room. Mom? You're still up? Michael sounded surprised, as if he'd forgotten I was a person with thoughts and feelings rather than a convenient childcare service. I wanted to make sure you all got home safely, I said, rising from my chair. Did you enjoy your dinner? It was amazing, Caroline gushed. 7 courses, wine pairings with each one. The chef came out to meet us, Stephanie added. Apparently, Mr. Montgomery knows him personally. How nice, I said. The children are all asleep. I'll head up now myself. Good night. As I climbed the stairs to my cramped spare room, I heard their conversation continue without missing a beat, my departure not even warranting acknowledgement. In the darkness of my room, I contemplated what I had observed over the past 2 days. There had been no genuine warmth, no real inclusion, not even basic courtesy. I had been treated as an afterthought at best, an inconvenience at worst. The time for gentle lessons had passed. What my family needed was a reckoning, one that would either restore what they had lost or clarify that it was gone forever. Either way, I was finally ready to put myself first. The day after Christmas, I made my excuses and left Michael's house, declining offers to stay through New Year's. No one protested very hard. With the holiday obligations fulfilled, my presence was no longer necessary. "Are you sure you don't want Michael to drive you, Mrs. Wilson?" Caroline asked, already dressed in yoga attire for her morning class. "It's no trouble." It would have been the first genuine offer of help all visit, but I shook my head. "I've already called a car service. Should be here any minute." Caroline looked relieved. "Well then, safe travels. It was lovely having you." The insincerity hung in the air between us, but I simply smiled and wheeled my suitcase to the door. Michael emerged from his office long enough for a perfunctory hug, while Stephanie and James had already departed with their families the previous evening, citing work commitments and travel plans. The luxury town car that arrived, not the basic taxi Caroline had clearly envisioned. Raised eyebrows, but I offered no explanation as the driver loaded my bag into the trunk. "Airport, Mrs. Wilson?" he asked, holding the door.
No, Timothy.
"Take me to the Westlake building downtown, please. I have a meeting." The sleek black car pulled away from Michael's suburban McMansion, leaving Caroline staring after it with undisguised curiosity. Let her wonder, I thought. The days of explaining myself were over. At precisely 10 a.m., I was seated in the conference room of Geller and Associates, facing not just Harvey but a team of financial and real estate specialists. "Mrs. Wilson, these are the experts I've assembled for your project," Harvey began, introducing each in turn. "Diane Miller, our financial strategist. Robert Chun, who specializes in property acquisition. And Thomas Becker, who handles complex trust formations." I nodded to each, my posture straight, hands folded on the polished table before me. I'd dressed carefully for this meeting in a tailored charcoal suit. Not expensive, but well-cut and professional. The kind of outfit that commanded respect rather than the sweet old lady image my children preferred to see. "Thank you all for meeting on such short notice, especially during the holidays," I began. "As Harvey may have explained, I recently came into a significant sum of money, $16.4 million after taxes from a Powerball win. If the professionals were impressed, they hit it well." Only Thomas raised an eyebrow slightly. "My children are unaware of this windfall," I continued. "Based on their recent treatment of me, I intend to keep it that way while executing a two-part plan that requires your expertise." I outlined my intentions. First, the acquisition of my children's mortgages through a holding company that couldn't be traced back to me. Second, the organization of an elaborate family vacation that would ultimately serve as the setting for a significant revelation. "This is unusual," Diane said carefully when I finished. "But entirely legal," Harvey added quickly. "We've vetted the approach thoroughly." "I'm not concerned with unusual," I replied. "I'm concerned with effectiveness. My children have forgotten certain fundamental values: respect, gratitude, consideration. I intend to remind them." Robert tapped his pen thoughtfully against his legal pad. "The mortgage acquisitions are straightforward enough. Meridian Bank has already indicated they're amenable to selling these specific loans, particularly given the premium you're willing to pay. And the holding company structure we've created, Wisdom Properties LLC, provides the anonymity you're seeking," Thomas added. "Your children will simply receive notice that their mortgage servicer has changed, which happens frequently in today's market." "As for the cruise," Diane continued, "we've been in contact with World Elite's corporate events team. They're prepared to customize the experience according to your specifications, including the reveal moment you described." I nodded, satisfied. And the timeline? We can complete the mortgage transfers within 3 weeks, Robert confirmed. The cruise invitations would go out immediately thereafter, giving your family approximately 6 weeks to prepare for a mid-March departure.
Perfect, I said.
I want the invitations to be irresistible, the kind of luxury offer no one would decline. Emphasize that all expenses are covered, including airfare, excursions, even spending money. Harvey leaned forward. Mrs. Wilson, if I may, have you considered the potential relationship damage this plan might cause? While I understand your frustration, this isn't about frustration, I interrupted gently. This is about truth. My children have been operating under certain assumptions about me, about our relationship, about their own entitlement. Whether our relationship strengthens or dissolves after this depends entirely on how they respond to reality. The attorneys exchanged glances, but nodded in understanding. Then we'll proceed, Harvey concluded. The initial paperwork requires your signature today, and we'll need access to the lottery funds to begin the transactions. For the next 2 hours, I reviewed and signed documents, transferred funds, and made decisions about the structure of my new holdings. By lunchtime, Wisdom Properties LLC existed as a legal entity, and the process of purchasing 3 mortgages in upscale neighborhoods across the city had begun. What shall we do about a corporate address for Wisdom Properties? Thomas asked as we concluded. We typically use our office for client holdings, but given the unique circumstances, I considered this. Use my home address. But won't that tip off your children if they receive correspondence from their new mortgage holder? Diane questioned. Exactly, I replied with a small smile. Eventually, I want them to make the connection. But only after they've experienced what it feels like to have their housing security controlled by someone else. As the meeting adjourned and I prepared to leave, Harvey walked me to the elevator. This is the most interesting case I've taken in years, he admitted. Most lottery winners call us about tax shelters or investment strategies. None have ever asked to secretly buy their children's homes. I adjusted my simple pearl earrings, a gift from Robert on our 5th anniversary, before he decided family life was too constraining. Most lottery winners haven't spent Christmas in a spare room while their children went to a 7-course dinner without them, I replied. Harvey's expression softened. For what it's worth, Mrs. Wilson, I think they deserve the lesson you're planning. And I hope it works, that they recognize what they've taken for granted. Thank you, Harvey. So, do I. The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside. Because the alternative is that I enjoy my fortune without them. I've spent my entire adult life putting my children first. I'm prepared to spend the rest of it putting myself first, if necessary. As the doors closed on Harvey's thoughtful expression, I felt a curious lightness. For decades, I had operated according to what my children needed, what they wanted, what would make their lives easier. Now, I was charting my own course, one that might reunite my family on healthier terms or free me from the burden of one-sided relationships. Either outcome, I realized, was acceptable. That knowledge itself was liberating. In the car heading home, I made one final call to a real estate agent I knew from my hospital volunteering days. Marge? It's Eleanor Wilson. Yes, happy holidays to you too. Listen, I'm thinking of selling my house and looking at beachfront property. Something with a view and enough room for visitors if I decide I want them. The conversation concluded with plans to meet after New Year's. I put away my phone and watched the familiar streets of my city pass by. Soon, the wheels I had set in motion would begin to turn. My children's comfortable assumptions would be challenged. Their sense of security would waver. And I would finally discover whether the family I had sacrificed so much for still existed beneath the surface of the strangers they had become. Congratulations, Mrs. Wilson. You are now the proud owner of 3 residential properties. Harvey Geller slid the final document across his desk 3 weeks after our initial meeting. I signed where indicated, my signature as firm and decisive as it had been on the first page. No hesitation, no second thoughts. And my children have been notified of the change in their mortgage servicer? I asked, capping my pen, a sleek Mont Blanc I'd purchased to celebrate my new financial status, a small indulgence after a lifetime of practical ballpoints. The letters were sent yesterday, Harvey confirmed. Standard language indicating that Meridian Bank has transferred their loans to Wisdom Properties LLC, with instructions for updating their automatic payments. Nothing alarming. This happens routinely in the mortgage industry. Excellent. I returned the signed document, completing the transaction. And the second phase? Harvey opened an embossed folder containing mock-ups of cruise invitations, thick cream cardstock with gold lettering, custom designed for each family member. World Elite has outdone themselves, he said. These will be delivered by courier tomorrow, along with the pre-cruise documentation packets. Everything is confirmed, connecting luxury suites, private excursions, the onboard credit for each adult, even the custom welcome amenities you specified. I examined the invitation addressed to Michael and Caroline. The wording was perfect, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, an exclusive voyage, a chance to reconnect as a family away from everyday pressures. No mention of who is footing the bill, just an assurance that all expenses were covered as part of a special promotional package. They won't be able to resist, Harvey noted. We've emphasized the exclusivity, the luxury, the limited availability. Based on what you've told me about your children, they'll be calling to secure their spots before the courier's car leaves their driveways. Yes, they will. I agreed, a hint of sadness coloring my voice. My children's predictable materialism was precisely what had brought us to this point. Their eagerness to accept expensive gifts while offering nothing in return had created the perfect trap. The final arrangements for the reveal? Harvey prompted. All in place. Captain Reynolds has agreed to host a private dinner for our family on the third night of the cruise. That's when I'll explain exactly who owns their mortgages and what that means for their future. Harvey nodded, though concern flickered across his features. And you're prepared for their reactions? This is going to be quite a shock. I met his gaze steadily. I've been preparing for this moment since I spent Christmas in a spare room, Harvey. Their shock is long overdue. As I left the attorney's office, I felt strangely calm. The past 3 weeks had transformed my life in ways my children couldn't imagine. While they continued their routines, oblivious to my lottery win or my careful planning, I had sold my modest ranch house for a surprising premium in the hot market, purchased a stunning beachfront property 30 minutes outside the city, begun the process of furnishing my new home with pieces I'd always admired but never afforded, established a charitable foundation focused on supporting single parents, updated my will to reflect my new assets, and revised family relationships, hired a personal stylist who helped update my wardrobe and appearance. The Eleanor Wilson who had spent Christmas in the spare room, mild, accommodating, easily dismissed, was fading away. In her place emerged a woman who stood straighter, spoke more confidently, and no longer accepted scraps of attention from people who should have offered a feast of love. My phone buzzed with a text from James, the first communication from any of my children since Christmas. Hey Mom, just got a weird letter about our mortgage. Did you get something similar about yours? I smiled slightly. Of course James would reach out. He had always been the most considerate, even if that consideration had significant limits. He was also the most financially cautious, likely to notice any change in his arrangements immediately. I didn't, but my mortgage was paid off years ago, I replied truthfully. What did the letter say? Just that some company called Wisdom Properties now owns our loan. Probably nothing, but these scams are getting sophisticated. Might check with a lawyer. That sounds like a good idea, I texted back. Let me know what you find out. I knew exactly what he would find, that Wisdom Properties LLC was a legitimate entity, that the mortgage transfer was entirely above board, and that nothing about their payment terms had changed. What they wouldn't discover, yet, was that their mother now held the notes on their expensive homes. The next morning, couriers delivered the cruise invitations to all three of my children's homes. As predicted, the calls began almost immediately. "Mom," Stephanie's voice bubbled with excitement when I answered. "Did you get one of these amazing cruise invitations?" "I did," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Looks quite lovely." "Lovely? It's extraordinary." Greg checked, "and these suites go for like $20,000 each. And it says everything is covered: airfare, excursions, even spending money on board. Have you called to confirm your spot?" "Not yet," I said. "I wanted to check if everyone else was going first." "Are you kidding? Of course we're going. Michael and Caroline already confirmed, and James and Natalie too. The kids are over the moon. Can you believe they have a separate program just for children, with their own excursions and activities?" I let her chatter on about the amenities, the ports of call, the exclusivity of the offer. Not once did she question why our family had been selected for such generosity, or express concern that it might be too good to be true. The promise of luxury had overridden any natural caution. "I'm so glad we'll all be together," I said when she finally paused for breath. "It sounds like a wonderful opportunity for family bonding." "Absolutely," Stephanie agreed, though I knew her enthusiasm stemmed from the five-star accommodations rather than quality time with her mother. "And, Mom, pack something nice for the formal nights. I can help you shop if you need." I bit back a retort. The stylist I'd hired had already helped me select an elegant resort wardrobe that would surprise my fashion-conscious daughter. "Thank you, dear, but I've already taken care of it." After similar calls from Michael and James, both focused primarily on the luxury aspects of the trip rather than the family experience, I contacted World Elite to confirm all 16 spots: my 3 children and their spouses, my 5 grandchildren, myself, and the 4 empty spaces I'd reserved to maintain the illusion of a group package. As the cruise date approached, my new life took shape. I moved into my beachfront property, a modern glass and cedar home with panoramic ocean views from nearly every room. The main level featured an open-concept living area with soaring ceilings, a chef's kitchen, where I rediscovered my joy of cooking for pleasure, and a primary suite with a spa-like bathroom. Upstairs, 3 guest bedrooms waited, furnished but not yet assigned to any particular family members. I had purchased the home not out of spite or to flaunt my wealth, but because for the first time in my life, I was choosing based on what I wanted rather than what would serve others. The peaceful sound of waves breaking against the shore, the ever-changing canvas of sky and water visible from my windows, the space to breathe and reflect. These were gifts I gave myself after decades of compromise. 2 weeks before the cruise, I invited Harvey to my new home to finalize the last details. "This is spectacular," he said, accepting a glass of wine as we sat on the deck overlooking the water. "A far cry from the spare room." "Indeed," I agreed. Though to be clear, I didn't buy this house to prove anything to my children. I bought it because it brings me joy. "And the cruise?" Harvey asked with a knowing smile. "That's a different matter entirely," I admitted. "I've confirmed with Captain Reynolds that our private dining room is reserved for the 3rd evening. The ship will be between ports, so no one can suddenly decide to stay ashore." "And you're still planning to reveal everything at once? The lottery win, the property acquisition, all of it?" I nodded. "Maximum impact. They need to understand the full scope of their assumptions and misjudgments." Harvey sipped his wine thoughtfully. "I've had several acquaintances ask about Wisdom Properties, you know. Your son Michael's attorney called our office directly." "What did you tell him?" "Exactly what we discussed. That Wisdom Properties is a private investment company that occasionally purchases mortgage portfolios, and that the terms of their loans remain unchanged." "Was he satisfied with that?" For now, Harvey said, though he seemed particularly interested in your home address being listed as the corporate headquarters. I smiled. Michael always was the most financially savvy of my children. He's probably already suspicious, but can't quite put the pieces together. Are you concerned they might figure it out before the cruise? I shook my head. Even if they suspect something, their eagerness for a luxury vacation will override any caution. Besides, they've spent years underestimating me. That works to my advantage now. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. I watched the light play across the waves, feeling a profound sense of peace despite the confrontation that awaited. You've changed, Eleanor, Harvey observed. It's not just the house or the clothes. There's something different about your fundamental energy. Money doesn't change who you are, I said. It just gives you the freedom to be who you always were beneath the constraints. And who is that in your case? I considered the question carefully. Someone who no longer confuses generosity with self-erasure. Someone who understands that love without respect is merely tolerance. Someone who is finally ready to be seen. Your children may not like what they see, Harvey warned. They've grown accustomed to a mother who accommodates rather than challenges. That's precisely the problem, I said. And in 12 days, on a ship somewhere in the Mediterranean, they'll meet the mother they never really knew, the one who has been hiding in plain sight all along. The atmosphere at the cruise terminal hummed with excitement. Families dressed in resort wear clustered in groups, checking documents and snapping photos before boarding the gleaming white ship that towered above the port. At 22 stories high with a capacity for 3,000 passengers, the World Elite Voyager was a floating luxury hotel, complete with multiple pools, specialty restaurants, a theater, and even a zip line spanning the upper deck. I arrived early, watching from a quiet corner as other passengers streamed through the priority boarding lanes. My hair, now styled in a sophisticated silver bob rather than the practical cut my children were used to, caught the sunlight as I adjusted my oversized designer sunglasses. The cream linen pantsuit I wore had been chosen specifically for this moment. Elegant, expensive-looking without being flashy, a clear departure from the modest clothes my family expected me to wear. Stephanie and Greg were the first to arrive, their twins bouncing with excitement beside them. I observed them without approaching, noting how they bypassed the regular check-in line and headed straight for the VIP entrance, flashing their family reconciliation package credentials with obvious pride. Stephanie wore a new sundress with the tags hastily removed, and Greg sported designer sunglasses identical to those worn by his favorite actor. Michael and Caroline appeared next with their 3 children in tow, similarly drawn to the exclusive check-in area. Caroline kept glancing around, presumably to see if anyone recognized them or was impressed by their priority status. Michael had the same smug expression he'd worn at Christmas dinner while carving the ham at the head of the table. James and Natalie were last, arriving with just 15 minutes to spare. Their daughter Emma clutched a new tablet, likely purchased to keep her entertained during the flight. While James checked his watch repeatedly, a habit when he was anxious about schedules. None of them had spotted me yet. I had deliberately positioned myself away from the VIP lane, wanting to observe them unnoticed. The way they held themselves, the casual entitlement in their postures, the excitement about luxury rather than family time, it all confirmed what Christmas had shown me. Finally, I approached, timing my arrival so that all 3 families were clustered together at the priority boarding desk. "There you all are," I said, my voice carrying just enough to make them turn. I was beginning to think I'd have to board alone. 6 adult heads swiveled in my direction, expressions transforming from confusion to shock as they registered who was addressing them. I knew what they were seeing. Not the mother they expected, sensibly dressed, apologetic about taking up space. But a confident woman in expensive clothes, looking more like the wealthy passengers they'd been trying to emulate than the mother they'd relegated to a spare room. "Mom," Michael recovered first, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance. "Wow, you look different." "Thank you," I said simply, joining them at the desk and presenting my boarding documents to the attendant. I decided a Mediterranean cruise called for a wardrobe refresh. "That's not from Target," Stephanie said, eyeing my pantsuit with clear recognition of its quality. "Is that?" "Italian, yes," I confirmed. I treated myself. "But," Greg began, then stopped himself. I knew what he was thinking. "But you're on a fixed income. But you can't afford designer clothes. But you're supposed to be the sensible grandmother who wears catalog clothes and stays within her modest budget." "Grandma, you look pretty," my granddaughter Lily said, the only genuine compliment I'd received from my family. "Thank you, sweetheart," I replied, kneeling to her level despite my expensive pants. "I'm so excited to spend this vacation with you." The boarding agent cleared his throat. "Mrs. Wilson, we have you in the owner's suite on deck 15. Your family is in the connecting grand suites as requested." This revelation caused another ripple of confusion among my children. The owner's suite was the most luxurious accommodation on the ship, larger and more lavish than even their premium suites. "There must be some mistake," Caroline said quickly. "My mother-in-law wouldn't have the owner's suite." The agent checked his computer again. "No mistake, Mrs. Bancroft. Mrs. Eleanor Wilson, owner's suite 1502. The reservation notes indicate she's the primary contact for the entire group." 6 pairs of eyes turned to me again, questions evident but unasked. "Shall we board?" I suggested pleasantly. "I believe they have welcome champagne waiting." As we moved through the priority lane toward the gangway, my children clustered around me, voices low but insistent. "Mom, how did you end up with the owner's suite?" Michael demanded. "And what did he mean you're the primary contact?" "Someone had to coordinate 16 people," I said vaguely. "I had the time." "But the cost," Stephanie began. "It's covered," I interrupted smoothly. "Just like your suites." "Isn't that what the invitation said?" They exchanged glances, but couldn't press further without admitting they'd never questioned how a luxury cruise line had randomly selected our family for an all-expenses-paid vacation. Once aboard, the opulence of the ship temporarily distracted them from their questions. A white-gloved steward led us to the upper decks, where our adjacent suites formed a private enclave in the most exclusive section of the vessel. The grandchildren squealed with delight at the sight of their connecting rooms with bunk beds and gaming consoles, while the adults gaped at the marble bathrooms, private balconies, and complimentary premium bar setups. My suite, however, put theirs to shame. Twice the size of the others, it featured a separate living and dining area, a master bedroom with a king-sized bed that faced floor-to-ceiling windows, a bathroom with a soaking tub positioned to view the ocean, and a wraparound veranda with its own hot tub and lounging area. "This is incredible," James said, standing in my living room after the steward had left. "But Mom, seriously, how did we get all this?" The invitation was vague about why we were selected. I took a bottle of champagne from the ice bucket and began pouring glasses for everyone. "Does it matter? We're here, we're together, and everything is taken care of. Isn't that enough?" "Of course it is," Caroline said quickly, accepting a flute. "We're just surprised, that's all." "Life is full of surprises," I replied, raising my glass. To family, they echoed the toast, but I could see the wheels turning behind their eyes. Michael in particular kept surveying the suite, mentally calculating its cost and wondering how his financially cautious mother had ended up in such surroundings. James seemed more concerned with the logistics, who had arranged everything, why our family had been chosen. Stephanie, ever the corporate strategist, was likely trying to identify the angle, the catch, the hidden agenda behind such generosity. I've arranged for us all to dine together tonight in the main restaurant, I said, changing the subject. And Captain Reynolds has invited our family to a special dinner in 3 days. Private dining room, just for us. The captain? Stephanie's eyebrows shot up. Why would the captain invite us to a private dinner? I smiled. Another surprise. Now, shouldn't you all get settled in your suites? We sail in an hour. After they reluctantly dispersed to their own accommodations, I sat on my private veranda, watching as the ship's crew prepared for departure. The champagne tasted sweeter somehow, perhaps because I'd purchased it with my own money rather than accepting it as part of someone else's largesse. For decades, I had been the giver, the provider, the one who made sacrifices so others could have what they needed. Now I was providing for myself, and the feeling was intoxicating. The ship's horn sounded, signaling our imminent departure. From neighboring balconies, I could hear my grandchildren's excited shouts as the massive vessel began to ease away from the dock. In 3 days, this floating palace would become the setting for a family revelation none of them would see coming. I had spent Christmas alone in a spare room while they dined without me. Now, they would learn exactly what that decision had cost them. By the 3rd day of the cruise, my family had settled into a routine of luxury and leisure. My children and their spouses took full advantage of the premium amenities, spa treatments, specialty dining, exclusive shore excursions, while the grandchildren divided their time between the elaborate kids program and the various pools and activity centers scattered throughout the ship. We gathered for dinner each evening, sharing stories of our daily adventures before dispersing again to enjoy the nighttime entertainment. I observed them carefully during these interactions, noting how quickly they had adapted to their surroundings. Caroline and Stephanie had befriended other women from similarly affluent backgrounds, comparing shopping discoveries in the various ports. Michael and Greg spent hours at the high-stakes poker table in the ship's casino, while James took advantage of the premium golf simulator. Not once did any of them question the good fortune that had brought them aboard, or express concern about who was funding this extravagance. More tellingly, their behavior toward me had subtly shifted. My new appearance and apparent comfort in these luxurious surroundings had created a kind of cognitive dissonance. They couldn't reconcile the mother they had relegated to a spare room with the confidently dressed woman who somehow had the best suite on the ship and seemed to know several crew members by name. As a result, they treated me with a newfound caution, not quite respect, but a wary consideration born of confusion rather than care. The mystery deepened for them when the cruise director himself stopped by our table one evening to confirm our private dinner with the captain, addressing me by name and treating me with the deference usually reserved for VIP guests. "Mrs. Wilson, everything is arranged as you requested," he assured me. "Captain Reynolds is looking forward to meeting your family." After he left, Michael leaned forward. "Okay, Mom, what's going on? How do you rate this kind of treatment? And don't say it's part of the package because I checked and regular guests don't get private dinners with the captain." "All will be explained tomorrow evening," I said, sipping my wine. "Consider it my gift to the family." "A gift?" Stephanie looked puzzled. "But the whole cruise is already a gift from that promotion thing." I smiled enigmatically. "Yes, I suppose it is." Later that night, as the ship cut smoothly through the Mediterranean waters and most passengers were enjoying the evening entertainment, I stood on my private veranda and considered what lay ahead. The documents were prepared, the arrangements finalized. By this time tomorrow, my family would understand exactly who I had become and exactly what their treatment of me had cost them. Harvey had called earlier to confirm that everything was in place. "Are you still certain about this approach?" he had asked. "There's no going back once you reveal everything at once." "I'm certain," I had assured him. "Band-aids come off cleanest with one quick pull." Now, watching the moonlight on the waves, I felt a momentary hesitation. Was I being too harsh? Too dramatic? Was there a gentler way to teach the lesson my children needed to learn? But then I remembered Christmas in the spare room. The dismissive treatment. The casual cruelty of excluding me from dinner. The years of subtle diminishment as they grew more successful and I remained, in their eyes, the modest mother whose value lay primarily in free childcare and unconditional support. No, there was no gentler way. Some lessons required a shock to break through entrenched patterns, and my children had proven remarkably resistant to subtler forms of education. Morning brought our final port of call before the ship headed back toward home waters. Most passengers disembarked for excursions, but I had arranged for my family to stay aboard, enjoying exclusive access to the nearly empty pool deck and various amenities that would normally be crowded. "This is incredible," Greg enthused as we lounged beside the adults-only pool, attendants bringing endless refreshments. "How did you manage this?" "I simply asked," I replied. "Sometimes that's all it takes." By late afternoon, the ship was underway again, and my family members retreated to their suites to prepare for the evening's main event, dinner with the captain. I had informed them it was formal attire, and from the shopping bags that had accumulated in their rooms over the past days, I knew they had purchased new outfits specifically for the occasion. In my own suite, I dressed with particular care in a midnight blue evening gown with subtle beading that caught the light when I moved. Around my neck, I clasped a sapphire pendant that had belonged to my mother. The only piece of fine jewelry I'd owned before my lottery win. My stylist had helped me select the perfect accessories and had shown me how to apply makeup that enhanced rather than masked my age. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had finally stepped into her power, not despite her 62 years, but because of them. At precisely 7 o'clock, a crew member arrived to escort us to the captain's private dining room, a beautifully appointed space rarely seen by regular passengers. My family had assembled in the corridor outside our suites, the adults in formal wear, the children in the nicest clothes they had brought. I noted with amusement that Stephanie had purchased a designer dress for the occasion, while Caroline wore what appeared to be newly acquired jewelry. Captain Reynolds greeted us at the entrance, resplendent in his formal uniform. "Mrs. Wilson," he said warmly, taking my hand. "A pleasure to finally meet you in person after our many conversations. And this must be your family." I introduced each member, watching their faces as they registered the captain's words. Many conversations? Their confusion deepened. Inside, the table was set with the ship's finest china and crystal, each place marked with a personalized menu. An elegant folder sat beside each adult's place setting. "Please," Captain Reynolds gestured to the seats. "Mrs. Wilson has arranged a special evening for all of you." I took the head of the table, a position Michael had clearly been expecting to occupy, based on his momentary hesitation before taking a side chair. The captain sat at the other end, with my family arranged between us. As the first course was served, a delicate seafood tranche paired with a crisp white wine, the conversation remained light but strained. My children clearly wanted to ask questions, but were constrained by politeness and the formal setting. After the main course, Captain Reynolds nodded to me. "Perhaps now would be a good time for your announcement, Mrs. Wilson?" All eyes turned to me. I dabbed my lips with my napkin and sat a little straighter. "I want to thank all of you for joining me on this beautiful ship," I began. "It's rare that our entire family can be together like this, away from work and daily responsibilities." Murmurs of agreement circled the table. "I've been planning this gathering for some time," I continued. "Ever since Christmas, actually." A flicker of unease passed between my children. Christmas, when they had put me in the spare room and left me to babysit while they enjoyed a gourmet dinner without me. "Which brings me to the reason for this special dinner," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I have some news to share with all of you, and some explanations to make." I reached for my water glass, taking a small sip before continuing. 3 weeks before Christmas, I won the Powerball lottery. After taxes and choosing the lump sum option, I received just over $16 million. The silence that followed was absolute. 6 adult faces stared at me in shock, forks suspended midair, wing glasses forgotten. Even the grandchildren sensed something momentous had occurred, their usual fidgeting stilled. That's not possible, Michael finally managed. You would have told us immediately. Would I? I asked mildly. I certainly planned to. I came to Christmas dinner intending to share my good fortune with all of you, to pay off your mortgages, set up college funds for the grandchildren, perhaps buy a vacation property we could all enjoy. I let my gaze travel around the table, meeting each adult's eyes in turn. And then you put me in the spare room while Caroline's parents got the master suite. And then you excluded me from Christmas dinner and left me to babysit. And I realized something important. Money doesn't create character. It reveals it. Caroline's face had lost all color. Stephanie was gripping her napkins so tightly her knuckles were white. James looked physically ill. So I changed my plans. I continued. Instead of announcing my win, I watched and waited. I observed how you treated me when you thought I had little to offer. When you assumed I was dependent on your occasional generosity rather than a potential source of financial support. Mom, we never, Michael began, but I held up a hand to silence him. Please look at the folders beside your plates, I instructed. Each contains some information you might find illuminating. With trembling hands, they opened the folders. Inside each was a copy of my lottery win announcement from the State Lottery Commission, a document showing the sale of my modest house and purchase of my new beachfront property, and most significantly, paperwork showing that Wisdom Properties LLC now held the mortgages on all 3 of their homes. Wisdom Properties, James whispered, understanding dawning. The company that bought our mortgage. That's you. Me, I confirmed. I purchased all 3 of your mortgages shortly after Christmas. You've been making payments to me for the past 2 months, though you didn't know it. But why? Stephanie's voice cracked. Why would you do that instead of just paying them off like you said you planned to? Because you needed to learn something important, I said. Something about respect, consideration, and gratitude. Something about treating people well not because of what they can give you, but because of who they are. Greg was rapidly flipping through the documents. So this cruise, the suites, everything, it was all you? Everything, I nodded. The family reconciliation package doesn't actually exist. I created it, funded it, and arranged it specifically for this moment. Caroline, ever practical even in shock, focused on the immediate concern. You own our house? You can. What? Evict us? Technically, yes, I said. I own the debt secured by your homes. I could call those debts due immediately if I wished, which would effectively force you to sell or face foreclosure. The blood drained from 6 faces simultaneously. However, I continued, that isn't my intention. I have no desire to make my grandchildren homeless or to destroy your lives. What I want is something much simpler: recognition, respect. A family relationship based on mutual consideration rather than obligation and utility. Captain Reynolds, who had remained silent throughout this revelation, now rose discreetly. Perhaps I should give your family some privacy for this discussion. Mrs. Wilson, crew members are available outside if you need anything. I thanked him, and he departed with a respectful nod. In the silence that followed, my family seemed frozen in place, the magnitude of what had occurred still sinking in. I had orchestrated not just an elaborate reveal of my financial situation, but a complete reversal of the power dynamic they had taken for granted for decades. So, what happens now? Michael finally asked, his voice unnaturally high. What do you want from us? I looked at each of them in turn. These adults who had once been children I loved fiercely and unconditionally. Children I still loved, despite everything. What I want is for you to understand something fundamental, I said. Your treatment of me at Christmas wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of years of subtle dismissal and diminishment. Years of taking my support for granted while offering little in return. Years of treating me as an accessory to your lives rather than a full person with needs and feelings of my own. Tears welled in Stephanie's eyes. James stared at his plate, unable to meet my gaze. Michael's jaw worked as he struggled to formulate a response. The spare room at Christmas was merely a physical manifestation of the emotional space you've relegated me to for years, I continued. Convenient when needed, invisible when not. And while I allowed that pattern to develop, taking responsibility for my own role in it, the time has come for change. What kind of change? Caroline asked cautiously. I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. That depends entirely on you. On whether you can see me, truly see me, as a person deserving of consideration rather than a resource to be tapped or an obligation to be managed. Of course we see you, Michael protested. You're our mother. Am I? I asked. Or am I the babysitter who doesn't complain? The background figure who doesn't demand attention? The parent who gives endlessly without expectation of reciprocity? No one answered. The truth of my words hung in the air between us, undeniable. I've spent my entire adult life putting your needs before my own, I said, my voice softening slightly. That was my choice, and I don't regret it. But I will no longer accept being treated as an afterthought in return. My time, my presence, my participation in your lives, these are gifts, not obligations. And like all gifts, they can be withheld if not appreciated. What are you saying? James finally looked up, fear evident in his expression. That you'll cut us off if we don't. What, treat you better? I'm saying that from this point forward, our relationship will be reciprocal rather than one-sided. I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood. I'm saying that I am Eleanor Wilson, lottery winner, property owner, woman of means and independence, and I deserve to be treated with the same respect you'd show to any other person of influence in your lives. I moved toward the door, then turned back for one final statement. We have 4 more days on this ship. I suggest you use them to reflect on what kind of relationship you want with me moving forward and what you're willing to contribute to make that happen. Because while I have no intention of using my financial leverage to punish you, neither will I continue to fund lives that exclude me except when convenient. With that, I walked out, leaving them to digest both the dessert and the bombshell I had dropped. As the door closed behind me, I finally allowed myself a moment of emotional release. My hands trembled slightly as I made my way back to my suite, the weight of decades-long patterns finally confronted. I had done it. Laid bare both my financial reality and my emotional boundaries in one decisive stroke. What happened next would determine whether my family could adapt to seeing me as I truly was, or whether I would need to build a new life without them at its center. Either way, I had reclaimed my power. And that, regardless of the outcome, was worth more than all the lottery millions in the world.